Hey party people! Today I am gonna hit two flies in one swat, as we say it in Sweden. And the first fly is to reuse an old sheet that had an accident. And that is not nearly as disgusting as you might think. This was an accident with rust from the washing machine. And in all honesty, I'm going to add some more rust to this in the end. But first, I am going to try a reservation technique using a wheat paste when dyeing this piece. I'm not so sure how that works. I've never tried it before, so let's have a look together. But one thing I know for sure is that rust, that leaves a stain that you can absolutely not ever get out of your fabric. And dyeing with rust is a super cool technique. I've tried it before and you can get some really cool results. And I am preparing a rust bath. I placed a few iron things into a bucket and poured water on. We're going to use that later. But first, let's make use of that old sheet and make it into a dress. And naturally, when cutting out, you end up with the rust stain straight onto your stomach. But moving on. I have made so many different dresses from this pattern, with a few variations, of course. Here I am marking the pockets, so we have two front welt pockets. I'm also adding interfacing to the top end of these pockets, but not the bottom end, because that is sewn into the skirt seam. So this is a very smart solution, if I say it myself. You do get proper pockets with just half the job. And that interfacing is added on because I make small clips into the fabric to the corners here to be able to turn the pockets. And that piece of fabric needs to be reinforced a little bit. Personally, I always include this type of reinforcement. Some people do it only in thin fabrics, but you do you. And with the front pockets done, it's time to move on to the next step, and that would be the yoke. And this has two pieces. It's divided at center back. It has two long tie bands that is, dramatically swaying down the back. The neckline is finished with bias tape and the same for the arm openings. And of course, naturally, when I made the bias tape, it ended up being just like 2 centimeters too short. So I had to add on a small piece. But in the end, they turned out really good. I turned them to the inside and sewed them down and top stitched around both the neckline and the arm openings. And I made a double top stitching, one close to the edge and one further in, maybe 1 centimeter. I also left a little bit of the bias binding visible, like a piping almost, around both the neck hole and the armhole. I also created 2 long strips of fabric and I cut them in half, both of them. One short, one a little bit longer, and these I added at the bottom of the pockets, and this is just purely decoration. Next step is attaching the skirt to the top, and with just hemming left, the dress is completely done. And now I guess it's time to start preparing for the rest of the experiment. The first step will be the rusty water that I prepared earlier. So I took the dress out in the garden and placed it on top of a plastic bag. And I took my bucket and plastic gloves and a small little container and I started pouring out this rusty water. First a little here and a little there, just a small splatter. And finally, I just placed all of these rusty items on top of the fabric. And when I was happy with the placement, I rolled it all up and stuffed it into the plastic bag and left it to simmer for, I think it was 2 days. And after 2 days in this suspicious looking plastic bag in the garden, I unrolled it and removed all these rusty things. And I was sort of happy with the look of it all. Rust stains, yes, but not extremely much. Now it was time to mix up the next experiment. And that would be the dough or the wheat flour mix, the flour paste. This is just wheat flour and water, and I just winged it. It can't be too runny, it can't be too stiff. And when I was happy, it was very gluey. I just dabbed it on. And since I was doing this outside on the lawn, I also included a fair bit of grass cuttings, but that didn't make any difference in the end. It worked out just fine. But this was definitely pure experimenting. I have never done this before. So how thick should I put it on? How thin? I just made, a little bit of everything. Thick here, thin there. And then I left it to dry in the sun. Afterwards, I brought it in and I started to crackle it. You just crumble it between your hands. Very satisfying sound, I can promise you. I had no way to know, was it good enough? Was it going to be okay? So I just moved on. I wanted to also include a little bit of tie-dye. I wanted some parts of the dress to be the lighter color. So I tied that off and tied a plastic bag around it. And it was time for the color. And I picked something called dark violet. And I had to read the instructions, and I brought out my dyeing pot. Found a good stick in the garden and started to mix it up. And when the mix is ready, I'm dunking it in. Ta-da! Ooh, pretty color. Yeah, that's true. This is a very pretty color. This is a Swedish brand. It's called Nitor. No idea if it's available in other countries. I kept it on the stove for maybe an hour, I think. After that, I brought it out in the garden and started rinsing with cold water. That didn't really get rid of the flour paste properly, but I put it in the washing machine on a cycle and dried it and tried it on, and oh my god, I love this dress. Have a look at this miracle. It is so pretty.